Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
In order to understand the mechanisms of shade modification and characterizations, it is necessary that we have some basic knowledge of color terminology and the color systems that we will be using in our exercises. If we wish to have an object such as this small box reproduced, it would be quite simple for us to specify a box of a given height, length, and width, and made of a certain material. However, describing its color poses a more complex problem. It is evident that it is necessary to have a method of specifying color and color changes without sending a sample. In the 1900s, Albert Monsell developed this color notation system, which is a system used in dentistry and most of the industries that are involved with color. Basically, it describes color in a three-dimensional system, much as we specified the size of the box. Hue is another name for color. And here you'll notice that we have a series of hues: red, green, blue, yellow, etc., and the intermediate colors between. So hue is another term for color. We also have two other dimensions that we have to consider, and the next is value, which is the grayness in the color itself, and this is represented by our central axis. We also have a value scale starting from black, which is a very low value, progressing up the scale to white, which would be our very highest value. And our last dimension of color is chroma, or the degree of saturation in the color. And here you can see that we've added one segment of color in a red hue to demonstrate the chroma. And the chroma, again, starts from the central axis with a very low or pastel shade and progresses out to the outer periphery, where the chroma becomes stronger and the color becomes more and more saturated. The value of this system, not only in describing color, but also in describing color changes, can be seen readily if we said to a technician, let's make the color a bit darker. Now, he might misconstrue this as meaning that you wanted the color made more dramatic or an increase in chroma, and you'd end up with a shade as indicated here by the arrow, where in actuality you may have wanted the value dropped or lowered and made more gray. And here you can see the difference between the two interpretations of your notation to the technician. So it has value not only in describing color, but also probably more important to us in describing changes in color. We now have a demonstration with some glasses to illustrate hue, chroma, and value. We have added some red dye to one of the glasses as a control, and obviously, since it's a minimal amount of dye, it appears somewhat pinkish and rather high in value. And to our other glass, we will begin adding some additional red dye, a drop at a time. And here you can see that we've added some, and our chroma is beginning to increase slightly. And we'll add a little more dye and a little more dye. And now we'll stir this to show the increasing saturation or increase in chroma between the two as we began to add more and more dye. And now, if we switch over to black and white, you'll notice that we do have a difference in value between the two. As the chroma increased, the value decreased. Although on a theoretical basis, the value should have remained the same, in actuality, as the chroma increases, the value will slightly decrease. To summarize then, hue is the name of the color. It is that quality by which we distinguish one color family from another, as red from yellow, or green or blue or purple. Chroma is the strength of color. It is that quality of a color by which we distinguish a strong from a weak one, so that a pastel shade would be a color of very low chroma on out to a very saturated hue, which would be a color of a very strong chroma. Lastly, value is the lightness of color. It is that quality by which we distinguished a light color from a dark one. And on the value scale, black would be 1 or 0, progressing up to 10, which would be white, with the intervening steps of gray. To understand the mechanics of color of a Ceramo-Metal restoration, we should be familiar with the three color systems involved. They are the additive, subtractive, and partitive systems. With light, we will be dealing with the additive system, and we've set up three projectors here, each with a different colored filter, a red, a green, and a blue. We will start with green light, on which we will superimpose red, and last blue. The results of adding the primary colors of white light, red, green, and blue, is the generation of the secondary colors of the additive system, cyan, magenta, and yellow, which are also the primary colors of the subtractive system. Note that at the center, where all three primary colors are mixed, they yield white light. Therefore, the maximum brightness, white, results when all three colors of the primary system of light are added. The subtractive system is the absorption of light by transparent colors on top of or in front of each other. With light, we added energy to generate maximum brightness or white. The transparent filters or pigments absorb energy, resulting ultimately in a total absence of brightness or black. To demonstrate, we will place a transparent magenta filter over this yellow one. The result is red, a secondary color in the subtractive system, but a primary color in the additive system. With the addition of cyan, we have superimposed the primary colors of the subtractive system and generated the secondary colors red, green, and blue. In the central area, where all three filters overlap, all light is absorbed and black is the result. Now let us reverse the process. Over a reflective white surface, we have superimposed three transparent filters, top to bottom, cyan, magenta, and yellow. If we now beam a white light on the surface, and remember, the light is composed of the basic colors red, green, and blue, all of the visible energy will be absorbed, and the surface will appear to the observer as black. That is, no color will be apparent. But we know that there are three color layers on the white surface, and yet it appears black. Why? As the light energy strikes the surface, it passes first through the cyan layers, and the red energy is absorbed. The magenta absorbs the green, and the yellow the blue portion of the white light. No light energy remains to be reflected from the white subsurface, and therefore it appears black to the observer. Now we will remove the cyan layer. The magenta absorbed the green, the blue is blocked by the yellow, and the red energy passes through and is reflected from the white substrate to the observer. The surface is interpreted as being red. Removing the magenta filter allows the red and the green energy to be reflected, and when they are additively combined, they appear to the observer as yellow. The partitive system refers to an average optical mixing, or the process of dividing colors to be mixed into very small color segments. It is a proportional relationship between the physical and physical concepts of both the additive and subtractive system, plus physiologic and psychophysical conditions. The subtractive system applies only to transparent pigments. As dental ceramic colorants are opaque metal oxides, we cannot use a subtractive system in its purest form. However, the partitive system does meet this requirement. An example of the partitive system is this painting by Signet. The enlarged area on the right shows the painting is a series of small dabs of color. When viewed from a distance, however, the dabs merge to form the total colored pastoral scene shown here. Another example of the partitive system are colored printed pictures, which if enlarged would appear as a series of colored dots. When the colored dots, shown here, are seen from a distance, they merge and appear as a uniform gray color. The dental porcelains are basically a translucent glass matrix to which small particles of metallic oxide colorants are added. A highly pigmented opaque porcelain is applied to the metal coping to mask the casting. This overlay of body porcelain illustrates the dispersion of the colorants. Now the less pigmented incisal porcelain is added, and over this a layer of translucent enamel is applied. This is a simplistic illustration. However, it does demonstrate the application of the color system to Ceramo-Metal restorations. To summarize, the additive system is the mixing of the primary colors of light, red, green, and blue, to yield white light. The subtractive system is the converse of the additive system. The transparent filter or pigments of the subtractive primary colors, cyan, magenta, and yellow, are superimposed, and all light energy is absorbed, and black is the result. The partitive system is a proportional relationship between small opaque colorants. It is the combination of physiologic and psychophysical phenomena that enables the visual complex to merge these small particles when viewed at a distance to form a homogeneous color and form. Although we will basically be using the rules of the subtractive system for colorant application, some of the phenomena that are observed can only be explained by applying the partitive theory. Now let's put this knowledge to a practical use. With a simple color wheel, we can demonstrate the mixing of color using the rules of the subtractive system. The subtractive primaries are yellow, cyan, and magenta. When two primaries are mixed, such as magenta and cyan, the result is a complementary color, in this case blue. Blue is a complement to the third primary yellow in two ways. When placed alongside each other, the primary colors appear brighter and more intense. Conversely, when the primary is mixed with its true complement, the result is a translucent, complex gray. This is important when the value of a restoration is adjusted to a lower level. Gray colorant is a semi-opaque, and if used to effect this change, it would cause the surface of the restoration to become cloudy and lifeless. However, by generating a complex gray using the primary complement mix, we can preserve the porcelain's translucency and vibrance. Unfortunately, metal oxide pigments used in dental ceramics are limited in their capability to produce some of the hues, especially those in the red spectrum. We therefore cannot use a true subtractive wheel. It must be modified to meet these limitations. The cyan has been removed and orange added, and a high-level red is replaced by a low-saturation red or pink. This color shift, fortunately, has several advantages. Orange is a frequently used hue in dental shade range, and with the replacement of cyan, a red hue is now contained in each pair of the complementary colors. As red is a complement of green, this helps to neutralize the tendency towards greening at the porcelain-metal interface. Since metal oxides are opaque colorants, a pure subtractive system would not in itself be applicable. The system is more closely allied to the partitive color concepts. Although we cannot apply the true subtractive system, still complementary mixing may be used to intentionally lower the value and preserve the natural translucency and vibrance of the porcelain restoration. The application of surface colorants can be a valuable adjunct to the armamentarium of the dentist when working with aesthetic restorations. However, it must be realized that there are limitations to the effects that can be attained. The procedure affords the practitioner with the opportunity to make chairside corrective modifications, not only to the basic shape and surface texture of the restoration, but also to affect subtle changes in its basic shade and characterization. The major disadvantage of the procedure is that the color pigments are applied only to the surface of the restoration. This is a problem not only with shade modification, but also when characterizing. An analogy can be drawn between the application of surface colorants for shade modification and the placement of a Venetian blind on a window. As the colorants are applied, the blind is closed and less light is allowed to enter. The result is that less of the intrinsic porcelain pigment is seen. Spectral changes occur, and the restoration loses some of its natural vitality and becomes more metameric. It cannot be overemphasized that the application of surface colors must be minimal and that only subtle changes should be considered. Special problems also occur with some characterization techniques. Many of the natural characteristics of a vital tooth occur just below the surface, or in the case of a hairline and enamel checks, they can extend to the entire depth of the enamel. With a surface application, we can only simulate this depth by creating an optical illusion. The obvious solution of this problem of shade modification would be to select the exact shade prior to the fabrication of the restoration, incorporating all the desired characterizations and surface contours. Realistically, this is not always possible. Although the application of surface stains is primarily considered a corrective tool, it can be equally effective as a preventative technique. Customizing of shade buttons can supply the ceramic technician with a visual prescription of shade and characterizations desired. In many difficult situations, this procedure can virtually eliminate the necessity of post-fabrication shade correction. Optimally, the ceramist strives to create a color match using the natural porcelain shades, altered as required by subsurface applications of color concentrates and opaque modifiers. This intrinsic coloration and characterization will create the maximum optical illusion and natural translucency and vitality. Ceramic stains are colored metallic oxide pigments dispersed in a transparent glass base. All of the pigments used will not burn out within a fusing temperature of porcelain. This common characteristic limits the range of hues available for staining procedures. The metallic pigments utilized for surface modification are the same colorants that are used in dental opaque and body porcelains. The quality and the size of the pigments and the characteristics of the base are the variables. This Vita stain kit provides a wide range of shades to select from. As with many of these stain kits, a shade identifier is provided. However, the actual selection of the colorant is left to the judgment of the user. Jelenko, with their DTC system, has attempted to solve the problem of selection of a complementary hue, and the TC notations are their true complements. Mixing a dominant hue with its complement produces a complex gray. In contrast to the simple gray, which is semi-opaque, complex grays have a high degree of translucency. Using this technique, the value of a restoration may be lowered with a minimal loss of translucency. When discussing aesthetic modifications with a patient, it is suggested that the term stain be avoided. Stain has a connotation of something dark to be removed, as a tea stain on teeth. The term shade modification or characterization is more descriptive and acceptable. Prior to the application of stains for shade modification, optimally, the glaze should be removed from the entire surface of the porcelain veneer. All alterations to shape and texture should be completed, and the porcelain surface should be free of porosity and other contaminants. Thoroughly mix the pigments with a medium to a creamy, homogeneous consistency prior to application. To lower the value of the restoration, you will apply the complement to the dominant hue to form a complex gray. Inasmuch as the majority of the teeth we deal with are in the yellow to orange range, we know that the complement of these two hues is either blue or violet. There are a number of ways to determine the exact dominant hue. One of them would be to apply either blue or violet to an adjacent tooth until the desired effect is achieved, and then to use this same pigment on the restoration until the value is brought down to the desired level. This can also be accomplished by using a shade tab in a similar manner. Once the complement has been determined, it is applied to the surface of the porcelain veneer, and when the desired level of value is achieved, the tooth may now be fired and the restoration completed. As the material is applied, if you have gone beyond the point where we can lower the value and create a complex gray, the tooth will begin to take on the shade of the complementary hue applied and will become either blue or violet in appearance. At this point, we have gone beyond the effectiveness of the complex gray and can no longer lower the value. Here you can see that we have substantially lowered the value on this facing compared with its original shade. Value may be raised in two ways in some select conditions. Addition of white will raise the value, but as white is a very opaque pigment, its addition may result in a dramatic loss of vitality and translucency and result in a cloudy, milky appearance to the restoration. Therefore, the use of white cannot be considered. However, in a case that the dominant hue may be added that is higher in value than that of the restoration, value and chroma may be increased and hue may be altered. The other technique to raise the value is to alter surface texture and apply an overglaze. We have frosted this piece of plastic, and you can see that the color tab behind it takes on the appearance of having had its value increased and its chroma lowered. This is due to the fact that we have created more surface scattering of the light. Less light reaches the pigment behind the plastic, and there is an apparent change in value and chroma. By applying some of the medium to the surface of the plastic, we once again restore the texture of the plastic. Now more light is again allowed to pass through the plastic and be reflected from the color tab. Chroma is once again returned to its original level. This graphic, simulating a Ceramo-Metal restoration, will illustrate the principle. With a relatively smooth surface on the restoration, light enters the porcelain with a minimal scattering and reflection. Maximum penetration occurs, and the light is reflected from the dispersed pigment particles and the opaque layer. When the surface is given a matte finish, surface scattering and reflection is increased. Less light reaches the color pigments and the incisal transmission is reduced. The value is raised and the chroma is weakened. As we know, most of the dentition that we will be dealing with will be in the yellow or orange range. As this is the dominant hue, if we have a tooth that is too yellow, the addition of pink will cause a hue shift to the orange range. Conversely, by adding yellow to a tooth that is too orange, we will dilute the red portion of the orange hue, and the tooth will now appear more yellow. A combination of this and the value lowering technique can be utilized in special cases when a greening occurs at the interface between the porcelain and the substructure. By adding pink, which we know is the complement of green, the greening is effectively masked and a complex gray is created, and then the dominant hue of the tooth can be applied to bring the natural appearance of the tooth back. Increasing the chroma is one of the simplest modifications. All that is necessary is to add some of the additional pigment of the dominant hue. The dominant hue can usually be determined by simply referring to the literature that is contained in most shade guides. The dominant hue of each individual shade is usually given. If this is not available, the dominant hue may be quite easily determined by applying either yellow or orange pigments to this particular shade range of tooth until the dominant hue is arrived at. Decreasing chroma that is too high is considerably more difficult. We can mix the hue of the restoration with its complement to achieve a complex gray. The value obviously will be lowered, and again the tooth will become more metameric. The other technique is to texture the surface and apply an overglaze. If there is any question as to the value or chroma levels during the shade selection process, it is recommended that a shade with a slightly higher value or lower chroma be selected. As we have seen, a decrease in the value and an increase in the chroma can be effected to a greater degree with less effort than can an increase in value or a decrease in chroma. One of the commonest characterizations is the hairline check that occurs in people with an older dentition, and we'll apply a rather heavy amount of brown stain, as you can see here, and then utilizing the brush we can wipe away the bulk of the material until we have just a very, very fine line, either irregular or irregular, and this will create the illusion of a small check line in the tooth. We can also create the illusion of an old composite restoration by simply outlining the margin again in the brown stain and then wiping away the excess with a brush, and then perhaps using a slightly lighter brown stain for the central portion of the restoration just to create the illusion. And after this has been fired, why, we'll have quite a realistic appearance to it. And here you can see a restoration that has already been fired, and although the stain is slightly heavier than what we would do in the mouth, it does give you the indication of where the characterization would go. The enamel check is a vertical crack in the enamel that causes an interruption in the transmission of light across the tooth surface. Make a thin mix of white stain and apply a wide vertical band to the restoration surface. The application should be nothing more than a thin wash. Clean a distal margin to a straight line without irregularities and feather the mesial to blend the surface without a demarcation line. The area to the distal of the stain will appear as a shadow, which is the effect observed in natural enamel cracks. One of the other more common effects is decalcification in the tooth, and this is very easy to accomplish with just a minimal amount of white stain deposited in the area that we'd like to have it, perhaps a little up in the cervical area also, and then complement this with just a very, very small touch of brown, which occurs quite frequently in these decalcification areas on teeth. Maybe just a little small amount of brown in there, and possibly a little touch of brown down in this area to give it a little more realistic appearance. We can also give the illusion of a smaller tooth by just a very minimal amount of white through the center area. And now we've broken the two compartments, upper and lower portion of the tooth, and given us the illusion of a slightly shorter tooth rather than a long, narrow tooth. We can also utilize some dark blue on the lingual aspect of the tooth, and this will shine through to the labial and give us a graying or more translucent effect to this area. And as we stated before, we could use some brown along the interproximal aspects to make the tooth slightly narrower, or to lower the value, and create basically any type of illusion that we would like to create with the surface stain. Many times you'll find a dentition that has been heavily stained because the patient used either tobacco or drank a great deal of tea or coffee, and this usually occurs up in the cervical area here and usually blends down interproximally slightly, as you can see here. And we will show you a dentition that has been stained, and many times you'll also find that there is a little bit of staining down along the incisal area, so the addition of a little bit of brown there will often create the illusion that you want. And you can also notice that the addition of just this much brown had a tendency to lower the value somewhat. Many mouths contain gold and silver restorations. The need for duplication of these restorations, while not so critical in the posterior as in the anterior, can add credibility to the finished case. The gold inlay can be simulated using yellow stain or a colloidal gold mixture. Amalgam restorations such as this can be simulated using a colloidal platinum mixture, or in this case a mixture of black, blue, and white. We've already added a minimal amount of stain to the occlusal surface on this 3-unit bridge, but occasionally it's necessary to enhance this to give us a more realistic appearance. And by just simply adding just a minimal amount of stain, we can break up the large white appearance on the surface of the bridge. And again, this can be customized to the requirements of the individual. We can also use this same type of stain interproximally to give a more realistic appearance to the bridge and make the units appear as individual teeth rather than as a portion of a bridge, by just simply, again, adding a very slight amount of brown stain interproximally, and perhaps some down in the buccal cervical area on the molar to represent some staining that would normally occur in this particular area. And again, we would like something rather subtle, but the application, the degree of the application, is determined by what's in the balance of the patient's mouth. The firing techniques for stains is pretty much standardized. However, the firing temperatures may vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. Here we have applied some violet stain to the incisal edge to create a more translucent incisal effect. And prior to introducing it to the muffle, we will place it in front of or slightly below the muffle to bring the restoration up to a temperature approaching that of the muffle, so that it won't experience as much thermal shock as it goes into the muffle. Depending on whether we're firing to an autoglaze, which is a natural glaze, or an overglaze, this will have a bearing on the temperature that we fire at. About 1,000 degrees to 1,200 degrees is adequate for the drying off stage, and after this has been attained, we'll set the desired temperature. We may fire stains within a range of from 1650 to approximately 1750. If fired at 1650, we would then refire it with the overglaze. If we fired to 1750, we would be attempting to attain the natural glaze on the porcelain. Once we've dried the porcelain, it will take on a chalky appearance, and now it's up to temperature slightly below that of the muffle, and we'll introduce it into the muffle and bring it up to the desired firing temperature. After we have completed the firing sequence, the restoration will be brought from the muffle and allowed to cool, usually under a glass beaker, to room temperature. The restoration has now been glazed, and we will inspect it to be sure that we have attained the characterization that we have attempted to create. And once we're satisfied that the restoration has completely glazed, the surface is smooth, we can clean the restoration and prepare to cement it to place on the patient.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.